the Puritans defined their piety around, they wouldn't have called it this because it's too full of Latin for them, and they were rejecting everything to do with the Antichrist Pope. But it's mortification. Mortification is a very Catholic word. We, in the season of Lent, define ourselves. And in a way, Lent is the Sabbath in the year for us, in the Puritan sense, not, I would say, in the Jewish sense. The practice for death of mortification. But say more for the folks about how this sparks a particularly American identity. I'm thinking, for example, of the tension between Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson and what Shepherd represents.
Right. So the early forms of dissent obviously come over arguments having to do with the Blue Laws. And I interpret the Blue Laws, again, engaging in a certain amount of wild historical interpretation as a kind of, well, there's a book whose title captures the whole idea for me, Biblical Primitivism. That, in a certain sense, what the Blue Laws were meant to do was recreate as best the Puritans could, under radically different circumstances, what they read in the Old Testament, that the Sabbath was, and the New Testament. And it's a kind of, it's like reenactment. I compare it to modern reenactment. And so it made sense to them. These were the things you must not do. But there was an element, there was a dark sort of element to it, and it was punitive, and there was an element of mortification. I mean, one of the things that shocked me as a Jew about the Puritan Sabbath was the insistence on sexual abstinence, which is exactly the opposite of what Jews do. Jews, believe in sexual activity on the Sabbath. They took quite literally, as if they were Karaites, the edict against fire, so they had to eat cold food, which when you're living up, in the northern part of this country can be a hardship. So there was an element of mortification. So they were harsh, these laws. They were very harsh. And so that sparked the first element of dissent and the first discussions that led to religious freedom. And I also think that they, I mean, much of the book is devoted to talking about the thesis that the Sabbath is an extraordinary sort of machinery for creating community and creating sort of solidarity and fellow feeling. And it really is. And it sort of works. And there's like a 4-step program for creating community that the Sabbath does. And I say, imagine that you're a social engineer, and imagine you wanted to create particularly cohesive societies. How would you do it? Well, one thing you would quickly do is you put everyone on a common calendar. Another thing you would do, that's sort of before the 4 steps. The first thing you'd really do is set aside one day in which everybody could sort of come together, would be freed from their work, and would come together. And the second thing you would do is make sure that that day is the same for everyone, so that everyone could come together, everyone could not work at the same time. And the third thing you would do is make it habitual, so that everybody did this regularly, and they could forge these bonds of community. And the fourth thing that you would do would be make it festive, make it something people wanted to do and people loved. And then you'd have this sort of setup in which community happened. And so I think that Emerson actually talks about this, and so does, Henry Ward Beecher, but a number of people in the 19th century talked about this, that without the Sabbath, without the American Sunday, neighborliness would disappear. Serendipitous life would disappear. Fellow feeling would disappear. And I think, and they think of it as a sort of element of American exceptionalism.